hide his astonishment. Calling one of the servants of the inn, I sent him to the druggist to sell the mercury that was left. He returned in a few minutes and handed me 15 carlini. The Greek asked me to give him back his own flagon, which was quite full and worth 60 carlini. I handed it to him with a smile, thanking him for the opportunity he'd afforded me of earning 15 carlini. I took care to add that I was leaving for Salerno early the next morning.
"Then we must have supper together this evening," he said.
During the meal, he told me that I ought to stop in Portici the next day to make 45 carlini out of the other 3 flagons of mercury. I answered gravely that I didn't want the money, and that I'd augmented the first flagon only in order to give him an agreeable surprise.
"You must be very wealthy," he said.
"No," I replied, "because I'm searching for the secret of augmenting gold, and it's a very expensive study for us."
"How many are there in your company?"
"Oh, only my uncle and myself."
"Why do you want to augment gold? The augmentation of mercury ought to be enough for you. Tell me, can the mercury augmented by you today be similarly increased?"
"No. If it were so, it would be an immense source of wealth for us." Supper over, I paid my bill and asked the landlord to get me a carriage and a pair of horses to take me to Salerno early the next morning. I thanked the Greek for his delicious muscatel wine, and requesting his address in Naples, I assured him that he would see me within a fortnight, as I was determined to secure a cask of his Cerigo. We embraced each other, and I retired to bed well pleased with my day's work, and in no way astonished at the Greek's not offering to purchase my secret. I was certain that he wouldn't sleep for anxiety, and that I'd see him early next morning. And indeed, as I'd foreseen, the Greek was in my room at daybreak. I received him in a friendly way, saying that we could take coffee together.
"Willingly. But tell me, Reverend Abbe, would you feel disposed to sell me your secret?"
"Why not? But only for a large sum of money, and I don't really know you."
"That doesn't matter," he said. "I'm sufficiently well known here to pay you in cash. How much would you want?"
2,000 ounces.
"Done," he said, "provided that I succeed in making the augmentation myself. What's the cost?"
1.5%. He took a pen, wrote a few words, and handed to me this order.
"At sight, pay to bearer the sum of 50 gold ounces on account of Panagiotti."
He told me that the banker resided within 200 yards of the inn, and he pressed me to go there myself. I didn't stand upon ceremony, but went to the banker, who paid me the amount. I returned to my room and placed the gold on the table, saying that we could now proceed together to the Tour de Grec, where, after we'd signed a deed of agreement, we could purchase the necessary ingredients. The Greek had his own carriage and horses, and we left the inn. When we arrived at the Tour de Grec, he signed a document by which he promised to pay me 2,000 ounces as soon as I disclosed the process of augmenting mercury by 1/4, the quality to be equal to that which I produced in Portici. He then gave me a bill of exchange, payable at sight in 8 days on Monsieur Gennaro de Carlo. I told him that the ingredients were lead and bismuth, the first combining with mercury, and the second giving to the whole the perfect fluidity necessary to strain it through the chamois leather. The Greek went out to try the amalgam, and I dined alone. Towards evening he came back, looking very disconsolate, as I'd expected.
"I've made the amalgam," he said, "but the mercury isn't perfect."
"It's the same as that which I sold in Portici," I said, "and that's the very letter of our contract. Now you know the secret. You can't deny it. However, if you're not satisfied, here are your 50 ounces. As I was taking the money out of my pocket, frightened to death lest he should accept it, he left the room, saying he didn't want it. In the morning he came to me as I was getting ready to go. I again offered to return the money I'd received, but he told me to keep it, and proposed to give me 50 ounces more if I'd give him back his bill of exchange for 2,000. After some discussion, I gave in. I received 50 ounces more. We dined together like old friends, and embraced each other cordially. As I was bidding him adieu, he gave me an order on his house at Naples for a barrel of muscatel wine, and he presented me with a splendid box containing 12 razors with silver handles manufactured in the Tour de Grec. We parted the best friends in the world, well pleased with each other. I stayed in Salerno for 2 days to provide myself with linen and other necessaries. Now possessing about 100 sequins, I was very proud of my success, in which I couldn't see any cause of reproach to myself. I left Salerno with 2 priests who were going to Cosenza on business, and we covered the distance of 142 miles in 22 hours. I stayed in Cosenza for 3 days, and departed with 2 letters in my possession. One from the Archbishop for the far-famed Genovesi, the other from the Bishop for Monsieur Gennaro Polo at St. Anne's. I reached Naples on the 16th of September, 1743, and I lost no time in presenting the bishop's letter to Monsieur Polo. After reading it, this excellent gentleman, whose duty was only to give me the sum of 60 ducats, insisted on receiving me in his house, because he wished me to make the acquaintance of his son, who was a poet like myself. The bishop had represented my poetry as sublime. I accepted his kind invitation. My trunk was sent for, and I was a guest in the house of Monsieur Gennaro Polo. Monsieur Gennaro's family was composed of his poet son and of a daughter, unfortunately very plain, of his wife and of 2 elderly devout sisters. Amongst the guests at his supper table I met several literary men, and was presented to the celebrated Genovesi. I'd already sent him the letter from the Archbishop of Cosenza. Before long I was generally accepted into the best society of Naples. Unfortunately, this was far from an unmixed blessing, for by chance I discovered that my friend's interest had induced them to obtain for me the honour of kissing the hand of Her Majesty the Queen. As soon as I learned of this, I hastened my preparations to leave Naples, for the Queen knew my mother. She would very likely have alluded to my mother's profession, and that knowledge would have mortified my society friends. I knew the force of prejudice. I and they would have been covered with ridicule, and I should have been ruined. I felt the best thing to do was to withdraw before it was too late. So, next morning, I left Naples. As we were driving out of the city, I examined my travelling companions. Next to me I saw a man of 40 to 50 with a pleasing face and a lively air. Opposite, 2 charming faces delighted my eyes. They belonged to 2 ladies, young and pretty, very well dressed. My companions conversed almost without interruption, and wonderful to relate, I didn't open my lips once. At Capua, where we were to spend the night, we put up at an inn, and were shown into a room with 2 beds, a very usual thing in Italy. The gentleman, who was an advocate, addressed himself to me. "Am I to have the honour of sleeping with the reverend gentleman?" I answered in a very serious tone that it was for him to choose, or to arrange it otherwise if he liked. The answer made the 2 ladies smile, particularly the advocate's wife, whom I preferred, and it seemed to me a good omen. After supper I went back to our room, and I was polite enough to go to bed first, in order to make it easier for the ladies to undress themselves with freedom. I likewise got up first in the morning, left the room, and only returned when I was called for breakfast. When we resumed our seats in the coach, we made light-hearted conversation, and the day passed off in an agreeable manner. My dawning inclination for the advocate's wife borrowed strength from the affectionate manner she displayed towards me. That day we slept in Marino, where, although the town was full of troops, we had 2 small rooms and a good supper. I couldn't have been on better terms with my charming companion, whose name was Donna Lucrezia. For although in the coach our eyes couldn't say much, I was sitting opposite to her, and our feet spoke a very eloquent language. There was but 1 bed in the room where supper had been served, and another in a small closet leading out of the room, but without a door. The ladies chose the closet, and the advocate retired to rest before me. As soon as the ladies had gone to bed, I bade them good night. Then, after undressing, I went to bed. Imagine my rage when I found, as I got into the bed, that it creaked loud enough to wake the dead. I waited, however, quite motionless, until my companion was fast asleep and snoring. Then I tried to slip out of the bed, but the infernal creaking woke my companion. He felt about with his hand, and, finding me near him, went to sleep again. Half an hour later, I tried a second time, but with the same result. I thought I had to give up in despair. But love is the most cunning of gods. In the midst of obstacles he seems to be in his element, and he contrives to bring success out of the most desperate situations. I'd given up all hope for the night, and nearly gone to sleep, when suddenly we hear a dreadful noise. Guns are fired in the street. People screaming and howling are running up and down the stairs. Then there's a loud knocking at our door. The advocate, frightened out of his slumbers, jumps out of bed and runs out of the room to obtain a candle. I rise at once, follow him to shut the door, but I slam it rather too hard. The double spring of the lock gives way, and the door can't be reopened without the key. I approached the ladies, who are still in bed, in order to calm their anxiety, telling them that the advocate will soon return with a light, and I'm at work while I speak. I meet with very little opposition, but, leaning rather too heavily on my fair lady, I break through the bottom of the bedstead, and we suddenly find ourselves, the two ladies and myself, all together in a heap on the floor. The advocate comes back and knocks at the door. Feeling my way, I reach the door and tell the advocate that I can't open it, and that he must get a key. The two sisters are behind me. I extend my hand, but I'm abruptly repulsed and judge that I've addressed myself to the wrong quarter. I go to the other side, and there I'm better received, till the husband returns. The noise of the key in the lock announces that the door is about to be opened, and we return to our respective beds. The advocate hurries to the bed of the two frightened ladies, thinking to relieve their anxiety, but when he sees them buried in their broken-down bedstead, he bursts into a loud laugh. He tells me to come and have a look at them, but I'm very modest and decline the invitation. He then tells us that the alarm has been caused by a German detachment suddenly attacking the Spanish troops in the city, and that the Spaniards are running away. In a quarter of an hour, the noise has ceased, and quiet is entirely re-established. The advocate complimented me on my coolness, got into bed again, and was soon asleep. As for me, I was careful not to close my eyes, and as soon as I saw daylight, I got up in order to perform certain ablutions and to change my shirt. It was an absolute necessity. Next day we reached Rome very early. As I took leave of my adored Donna Lucrezia and the rest of the party, I promised to give them a call on the following day. I was in Rome, with a good wardrobe, pretty well supplied with money and jewellery, not wanting in experience, and with excellent letters of introduction. I was free, my own master, and just reaching the age in which a man can have faith in his own fortune, provided he isn't deficient in courage and is blessed with a face likely to attract the sympathy of those he mixes with. I wasn't handsome, but I had a striking expression, which almost compelled a kind of interest in my favour, and I felt myself ready for anything. I began by delivering the letters of recommendation that I had been provided with. The first was to Father Giorgi, a learned monk who enjoyed the esteem of everyone in Rome. Indeed, the Pope himself had a great consideration for him. Father Giorgi read the letter with great attention, and expressed himself disposed to be my adviser. "You must come and see me often, and never conceal anything from me. Nothing, you understand, of what happens to you." "Well," I said, "I've also been furnished with a letter for the Cardinal Acquaviva." "I congratulate you. The Cardinal's influence in Rome is greater even than that of the Pope. Shall I deliver the letter at once?" "No. I'll see him this evening, and prepare him for your visit. Call on me tomorrow morning, and I'll tell you where and when you are to deliver your letter to the Cardinal. Do you speak French?" "Not a word." "You must learn French," said Father Giorgi, "and I hope you'll take your letter to the Cardinal dressed like a modest abbé, and not in this
elegant costume you're wearing. Adieu. Let me see you tomorrow."
The next day, the 1st of October, 1743, Father Georgi invited me to take a cup of chocolate with him, and informed me that the Cardinal would receive me at noon at the Villa Negroni, where he would be taking a walk. I proceeded to the Villa Negroni. The moment he saw me, the Cardinal stopped to receive my letter, allowing 2 persons who accompanied him to walk forward. He put the letter in his pocket without reading it, looked at me for several moments, and inquired whether I had any taste for politics. I answered that until now my tastes had been frivolous, but that I was ready to carry out anything His Eminence might require of me, if he should judge me worthy of entering his service. "Come to my office tomorrow morning," said the Cardinal, "and ask for Abbé Gama, to whom I'll give my instructions. You must apply yourself diligently to the study of French. It's indispensable." Kissing his hand, I took my leave. The next day I presented myself to the Abbé Gama. He was a Portuguese, about 40 years old, handsome and with a countenance full of candour, wit, and good temper. His manners and accent were quite Roman. He informed me in the blandest manner that His Eminence had himself given his instruction about me to his major domo, that I'd have a lodging in the Cardinal's palace, that I'd have my meals at the secretary's table, and that, until I learned French, I'd have nothing to do but make extracts from letters that he would supply me with. He then gave me the address of the French teacher to whom he'd already spoken on my behalf, a Roman advocate, Dell'Acqua by name, who lived opposite the palace. After this, and an assurance that I could at all times rely upon his friendship, he had me taken to the major domo, who made me sign my name at the bottom of a page in a large book already filled with other names, and counted out 60 Roman crowns, which he paid me for 3 months' salary in advance. After this, he accompanied me, followed by a staff officer, to my apartment on the 3rd floor, which I found very comfortably furnished. The servant handed me the key, saying that he'd come every morning to attend upon me, and the major domo accompanied me to the gate to make me known to the gatekeeper. I immediately returned to my inn, sent my luggage to the palace, and found myself established in a place in which great fortune awaited me. If only I'd been able to lead a wise and prudent life. Unfortunately, this wasn't in my nature. I naturally felt it my duty to call upon my mentor, Father Georgi, to whom I gave all my good news. He said I was on the right road, and that my fortune was in my hands. "Remember," added the good father, "that to lead a blameless life, you must curb your passions. Whatever misfortune may befall you, it cannot be ascribed to bad luck or fate. Those words are meaningless. All the fault will rightly fall on your own head." But I was deeply enamoured of Lucrezia, and happy in my love. To give her up appeared to me shameful. I revolted against such a necessity, and that evening I called upon her. The family knew my success, and warmly congratulated me. Lucrezia said that I looked sad. I answered that I was assisting at the funeral of my liberty, for I was no longer my own master. Her husband, always fond of a joke, told her that I was in love with her. I stayed only an hour with these charming people, but the very air around me was heated by the flame within my breast. I abstained from seeing Lucrezia again for 3 or 4 days, filling the time with learning French and making extracts from ministerial letters. On the very day that I decided to spend the evening with her, the worthy advocate called on me. He said that if I thought I was going to prove I wasn't in love with his wife by staying away, I was very much mistaken, and he invited me to accompany all the family to Testaccio the following Thursday, where they intended to have luncheon. At that time, every Thursday in October was a festival day in Rome. I felt certain that Donna Lucrezia looked forward to the excursion with as much pleasure as I did myself. We had no fixed plan. We couldn't have. But we trusted to the God of love and placed our confidence in his protection. I took care that Father Georgi shouldn't hear of the excursion before I mentioned it to him myself, and I hastened to him in order to obtain his permission to go. I confess that, to obtain his leave, I professed the most complete indifference about it. Consequently, the good man insisted that I went, saying that it was a family party and that it was quite right for me to enjoy myself in a respectable way. The party was to consist of the advocate, Lucrezia, Lucrezia's sister Angelique, the young man Angelique had recently become affianced to, Don Francisco, and the sister's mother, Donna Cecilia. To my astonishment, Donna Cecilia Monti was a charming young widow, who looked more like a sister than a mother to Lucrezia and Angelique. As we were ready to get into the carriages, the advocate told me that he'd ride with me in my carriage, and that the three ladies would go with Don Francisco in the other. I said he ought to keep Don Francisco company, and that I claimed the privilege of taking care of Donna Cecilia. Thereupon I offered my arm to the handsome widow, who thought the arrangement according to the rules of etiquette and good breeding. An approving look from Lucrezia gave me the most agreeable sensation. What with lunching and walking, we contrived to pass the afternoon very pleasantly, and I was all attention to her mother. As we prepared to return, the advocate carried off Donna Cecilia and went with her to the carriage in which were already seated Angelique and Don Francisco. Scarcely able to control my delight, I offered my arm to Donna Lucrezia, paying her some absurd compliment, while the advocate laughed outright, and seemed to enjoy the trick he imagined he'd played me. How many things we might have said to each other before giving ourselves up to the material enjoyment of our love, had not the moments been so precious. But, aware that we had only half an hour before us, we were sparing of the minutes. We were absorbed in voluptuous pleasure when suddenly Lucrezia pushed me back. The carriage stops, and the servant opens the door. "What's the matter?" I inquire.
"We've arrived."
Whenever I recollect the circumstance, it seems to me miraculous, for we were lucky all the way. The night was dark, and my beloved angel happened to be on the right side to get out of the carriage first. So, although the advocate was at the door of our carriage almost as soon as the footman, everything went right, owing to the slow manner in which Lucrezia alighted. When I got home, I went to bed. But how could I sleep? The burning flame which I hadn't been able to restore to its normal level in the too short distance from Testaccio to Rome was consuming me. In spite of the fire which raged through my veins, I didn't see my Lucrezia for 4 days following the excursion to Testaccio. I dreaded Father Georgi discovering my secret and deciding to cast me off. But, unable to resist my desires, I called upon Lucrezia after my French lesson, and found her alone and dispirited. "It's been so long," she said. "My beloved one," I said, "it's not that I can't find time to visit you, but I'd rather die than let my love be known publicly. I've been thinking of inviting you all to dine with me at Frascati, hoping that some lucky accident will smile upon our love. Oh, yes, do, dearest. I'm sure your invitation will be accepted." As indeed it was. So, the following Sunday, I ordered a splendid dinner at the Villa Ludovisi, and we all set out towards it. As we might miss each other during our ramblings, we agreed to meet again at the inn at 1 o'clock. The company went their various ways, and in less than a quarter of an hour I had Lucrezia entirely to myself. "Did you notice," she said, "how I managed to secure 2 hours alone with you? How clever love is!" "Yes, darling, love has made 2 souls one. I adore you. A month ago I was but an ignorant child. You are the first woman who has initiated me into the mysteries of love." "What? I'm your first love?" "I won't be your last. How great my successor's happiness will be! I shouldn't be jealous of her. But how I'd suffer if I thought that her heart wasn't like mine." Lucrezia, seeing my eyes wet with tears, began to give way to her own, and, setting ourselves on the grass, our lips drank our tears amidst the sweetest kisses. In a moment of calm, seeing the disorder we were both in, I told her that someone might come upon us. "Don't fear, my best beloved," she said. "We're under the guardianship of our good angels. But are you certain we're not suspected?"
My husband doesn't believe us to be in love with each other. My mother's a clever woman, and perhaps she suspects the truth, but she knows that it's no longer any business of hers. As to my sister, she must know everything, for she can't have forgotten the broken-down bed. But she's discreet. We passed the morning repeating that we loved each other, and in exchanging over and over again substantial proofs of our mutual passion. We all had a delicious dinner, during which I was all attention to the amiable Donna Cecilia. Then we drank coffee, I paid the bill, and we went rambling through the labyrinthine alleys of the Villa Aldobrandini. What sweet recollections that villa has left in my memory. It seemed as if I saw my divine Lucrezia for the first time. Our looks were full of ardent love. Our hearts were beating in concert with the most tender impatience, and a natural instinct was leading us towards a solitary refuge which the hand of love seemed to have prepared especially for the mysteries of its secret worship. There, under a canopy of thick foliage, we found a wide sofa made of grass and sheltered by deep thicket. From that place our eyes could range over a wide area, and we were perfectly secure against any surprise. Without a word being spoken, our ready hands soon managed to get rid of all obstacles, and to expose in a state of nature all the beauties which are generally veiled by troublesome wearing apparel. Then 2 whole hours were devoted to the most delightful, loving ecstasies. The journey back to the city lasted 2 hours. We were alone in my carriage, and we overtaxed nature, exacting more than it can possibly give. As we were getting near Rome, we were compelled to let the curtain fall before the climax of the drama that we were performing to our complete satisfaction. I returned home rather fatigued, but the sound sleep which was so natural at my age restored my full vigour, and in the morning I took my French lesson at the usual hour. The study of the French language took up all my mornings, but I called every evening upon Father Georgi, and although I went to him only as his protégé, it gave me some reputation. I seldom spoke before his guests, yet I never felt weary, for in his circle his friends would criticize without slandering, discuss politics without stubbornness, literature without passion, and I profited by all. After my visit to the sagacious monk, I used to attend the assembly of the cardinal, my master, as a matter of duty. One evening, Cardinal Acquaviva said to me, "You have not yet presented yourself to kiss the foot of our Holy Father?" "Not yet, my lord." "Then you must do so." I bowed in compliance to his wishes. The Abbé Gama told me to present myself to the Pope on the morrow. So, on the following day, I proceeded to Monte Cavallo, and I was at once led into the room where the Pope was, alone. I threw myself on my knees and kissed the Holy Cross on his most holy slipper. Benedict XIV was a learned man, very amiable. When he inquired who I was, I told him, and he answered that he knew me, congratulating me upon my being in the service of so eminent a cardinal. I felt quite at my ease with him, and I told him so much news and amused him so well that the Holy Father kindly said that he would be glad to see me whenever I presented myself at Monte Cavallo. That very evening at the Cardinal's assembly, I found that the news of my dialogue with the Pope was already known. Everybody was anxious to speak to me. I felt flattered, but I was much more delighted at the joy which Cardinal Acquaviva tried in vain to conceal. One morning towards the end of November, the advocate, accompanied by Angelique's intended, called on me. Don Francisco gave me a pressing invitation to spend 24 hours at Tivoli with the friends I'd entertained at Frascati. I accepted with great pleasure, for I'd found no opportunity of being alone with Lucrezia since. I promised to be at Donna Cecilia's house at daybreak with my carriage. It was necessary to start very early, because Tivoli is 16 miles from Rome and has so many objects of interest that it requires many hours to see them all. Dawn found me with my carriage and 4 at Donna Cecilia's door. The charming widow, notwithstanding her strict morality, was delighted at my love for her daughter.
The family rode in a large carriage hired by Don Francisco with room for 6 persons. At 7:30 we halted at a small place where an excellent breakfast had been prepared on Don Francisco's orders, and we all made a hearty meal. Then we continued on our way and reached Tivoli at 10 o'clock. We began by visiting Don Francisco's villa. It was a beautiful little house, and we spent the following 6 hours in examining together the antiquities of Tivoli. Lucrezia having occasion to whisper a few words to Don Francisco, I seized upon the opportunity of telling Angelique that after her marriage I should be very happy to spend a few days of the fine season with her. "Sir," she replied, "I give you fair notice that the moment I become mistress in this house you will be the very first person to be excluded." "I feel greatly obliged to you, Signora, for your timely notice." But I was astounded. Lucrezia, noticing the state I was in, inquired what ailed me. I told her, and she said at once, "My darling, my happiness can't last long. The cruel moment of our separation is drawing near. When I've gone, please force her to acknowledge her error." I've forgotten to mention that at Don Francisco's villa I happened to praise a very pretty room opening upon the orange house, and our amiable host, having heard me, said that it should be my room that night. Lucrezia feigned not to hear. As I said, we devoted 6 hours to an examination of the antiquities of Tivoli, returning to the villa towards evening tired and very hungry. But after an hour's rest, supper, which lasted 2 hours, and consisted of the most delicious dishes and most exquisite wines, restored us so well that everybody wanted nothing more than a good bed and the freedom to enjoy the bed according to his own taste. Lucrezia said that she'd sleep with Angelique in one of the rooms leading to the orange house. Don Francisco, taking a candle, escorted me to my pretty little room, adjoining the one in which the 2 sisters were to sleep. After showing me how I could lock myself in, he wished me good night and left me alone. Angelique had no idea that I was her near neighbour, but Lucrezia and I, without exchanging a single word on the subject, had perfectly understood each other. I watched through the keyhole and saw the 2 sisters come into their room, preceded by the polite Don Francisco, who carried a taper. After lighting a night lamp, he bade them good night and retired. Then my 2 beauties, their door locked, sat down on the sofa and prepared themselves for bed. In that fortunate climate this requires returning to the state of innocence of the Garden of Eden. Lucrezia, knowing that I was waiting to come in, told her sister to lie down on the side towards the window, and the Virgin, having no idea that she was exposing her most secret beauties to my profane eyes, crossed the room in a state of complete nakedness. Lucrezia put out the lamp and lay down near her innocent sister. I believe I never undressed myself as quickly as I did that evening. Then I open the door and fall into the arms of my Lucrezia, who says to her sister, "It's my angel, my love, never mind him, and go to sleep." What a delightful picture I could offer you if only I were able to paint voluptuousness in its most enchanting colours. What ecstasies of love from the very onset! What delicious raptures succeed each other until the sweetest fatigue made us give way to the soothing influence of sleep. The first rays of sun, piercing through the crevices of the shutters, wake us out of our refreshing slumbers, and like 2 valorous knights who have ceased fighting only to renew the contest with increased ardour, we lose no time in giving ourselves up to all the intensity of the flame which consumes us. "Oh, my beloved Lucrezia," I whisper, "how supremely happy I am. But, my darling, mind your sister. She might turn round and see us." "Fear nothing, my life. My sister is kind, and she loves me." "Don't you, my dear Angelique?" "Oh, turn round, see how happy your sister is, and know what happiness awaits you." Angelique, a young maiden of 17 summers, who must have suffered the torments of Tantalus during the night, wishes only for a pretext to show that she has forgiven her sister. She turns round and,
covering her sister with kisses, confesses that she hasn't closed her eyes all night long. Then, darling Angelique, also forgive him who loves me and whom I adore. Kiss him. And Lucrezia pushes me towards her sister, pleased to see her in my arms, motionless and languid. Now sentiment, still more than love, forbids me to deprive Lucrezia of the proof of my gratitude. I turn to her with all the rapture of a beginner, feeling my ardour increase with what Angelique must be feeling, as, for the first time, she witnesses the amorous contest. Lucrezia, dying of ecstasy, entreats me to stop, but as I don't listen to her prayer, she tricks me, and thus the sweet Angelique makes her first sacrifice to the mother of love. Lucrezia was astonished and delighted, and covered us both with kisses. Angelique, as happy as her sister, expired deliciously in my arms for the third time, and we met each other with so much loving ardour that it seemed to me I was tasting happiness for the first time. The sunlight reaching us through the closed shutters warned me that it was time to leave. We exchanged the most loving adieus, and I retired to my own room. A few minutes afterwards, the cheerful voice of the advocate was heard in the chamber of the sisters, reproaching them for sleeping too long. After much washing and a careful toilet, I thought I could show my face, and I presented myself coolly in the drawing-room. The two sisters were there with the other members of our group, and I was delighted with their rosy cheeks. Lucrezia was beaming with happiness. Angelique, as fresh as the morning dew, was radiant. After breakfast we took a walk through the garden, and finding myself alone with Lucrezia, I expostulated tenderly with her for having almost thrown her sister in my arms. "Don't reproach me," she said. "I've brought light into the darkness of my sister's soul. I've initiated her in the sweetest of mysteries, and now, far from hating you, she must love you dearly. My beloved, I learn that my husband's business affairs mean that we shall soon be leaving. I'm so unhappy to have to part from you, my beloved, but at least I can leave her to you. She will replace me." Her imminent departure was sad news indeed. But Lucrezia's proposal couldn't go unchallenged. "How can I love her, Lucrezia, when I adore you so completely? Besides, think of Don Francisco. I don't want to cause coolness between them, or to ruin the peace of their home. I'm certain your sister isn't like you. I'd wager that even now she's reproaching herself for having given way to her passionate nature." We returned to Rome, and for the 3 hours that she was with me in my carriage, Lucrezia had no reason to think that my ardour was at all abated. But it was only a few days later that the advocate called upon me to announce their departure for the day after the morrow. He expressed his warm friendship for me, and at his invitation I spent the 2 last evenings with Lucrezia. But we were always surrounded by the family, and so, finally, we parted. After the departure of this charming woman, I found myself in a sort of solitude very natural to a young man whose heart is empty of hope. I passed whole days in my room, making extracts from the letters written by the Cardinal, and His Eminence was kind enough to tell me that my extracts were judiciously made, but he insisted upon my not working so hard. However, I continued with my French lessons. My teacher had a pretty daughter named Barbara, who was always present, and who sometimes taught me herself, with even more exactitude than her father. A good-looking young man, who also took lessons, was courting her, and I soon perceived that she loved him. This young man often called upon me, and I liked him, especially on account of his reserve. Although I made him confess his love for Barbara, he always changed the subject if I mentioned it in our conversation. I'd made up my mind to respect his reserve, and didn't allude to his affection for several days.
But all at once he ceased his visits both to me and to his teacher, and at the same time I noticed that Barbara herself was no longer present at my lessons. I felt some curiosity to know what had happened, although it wasn't, after all, any concern of mine. Then, a few days later, as I was returning from church, I met the young man and reproached him for keeping away from us all. He told me that great sorrow had befallen him, and that he was prey to the most intense despair. His eyes were wet with tears. I told him that I'd no longer be his friend unless he opened his heart to me. Walking together through the cloisters, he said, "I've loved Barbara Delacroix for the last 6 months, and for 3 months she's been giving me indisputable proofs of her affection. 5 days ago we were betrayed by the servant, and her father caught us in a rather delicate position. He left the room without saying a word. I followed him, hoping to plead for his understanding, but he took hold of me by the arm, pushed me roughly through the door, and forbade me ever to present myself again at his house. I can't claim Barbara's hand in marriage. My father isn't rich, I have no profession, and she has nothing. But tell me, how is she? I'm certain she's as miserable as I am. I can't even get a letter to her, for she never leaves the house, even to attend church. What shall I do?" I could only pity him. As a man of honour, it was impossible for me to become involved. I told him that I hadn't seen Barbara for 5 days. Then, not knowing what to say, I gave him the advice tendered by all fools under similar circumstances. I advised him to forget her. By then we'd reached the quay of Ripetta, and observing that he was casting dark looks towards the Tiber, I feared his despair might lead him to commit some foolish attempt on his own life. In order to calm him, I promised to make some inquiries from Barbara's father about her, and to tell him of anything that I might learn. The next day I went to Monsieur Delacroix. After my lesson, I saw Barbara, who, passing from one room to another, dropped a paper and earnestly looked at me. I felt bound to pick it up, because a servant who was at hand might have seen it and taken it. It was a letter enclosing another addressed to her lover. The note for me ran, "If you think it is a sin to deliver the enclosed to your friend, burn it. Have pity on an unfortunate girl, and be discreet." The enclosed letter, which was unsealed, ran, "If you love me as deeply as I love you, you cannot hope to be happy without me. I am ready to do anything to unite our lives until death. Consider and decide." The cruel situation of the poor girl moved me almost to tears. Yet I made up my mind that I would return her letter the next day. I enclosed it in a note in which I begged her to excuse me if I could not render her the service which she required at my hands. I put it in my pocket, ready for delivery. The next day I went for my lesson as usual, but not seeing Barbara, I had no opportunity of returning her letter, and postponed its delivery to the following day. Unfortunately, just after I'd returned to my room, the unhappy lover made his appearance. His eyes were red from weeping, his voice hoarse. He drew such a vivid picture of his misery that, dreading some mad action counselled by despair, I couldn't withhold from him the consolation which I knew it was in my power to give. This was my first error in this fatal business. I was the victim of my own kindness. The poor fellow read the letter over and over. He kissed it, he hugged me, and thanked me for saving his life. Finally, he begged me to deliver his answer, as his beloved mistress must be longing for consolation as much as he himself had been. He assured me that his letter couldn't in any way implicate me, and that I was at liberty to read it. And truly, although very long, his letter contained nothing but the assurance of everlasting love and hopes which could not be realized. Yet I was wrong to accept the character of Mercury to the two young lovers. To refuse, I had only to recollect that Father Georgi would certainly have disapproved of my easy compliance. The next day I found Monsieur Delacroix ill in bed. Barbara gave me my lesson in his room, and I thought that perhaps she'd obtained her pardon. I contrived to give her her lover's letter, which she dexterously conveyed to her pocket, but her blushes would have easily betrayed her if her father had been looking that way. When my lesson was over, she seized an opportunity of slipping a letter into my pocket and immediately disappeared so that I had no chance of refusing. The letter was addressed to me and expressed feelings of warmest gratitude. She only desired me to inform her lover that her father had spoken to her again and that most likely he would engage a new servant as soon as he'd recovered from his illness, and she concluded her letter by assuring me that she never would implicate me in this business. Her father was compelled to keep to his bed for a fortnight, and Barbara continued to give me my lessons every day. I felt for her an interest which, from me towards a young and pretty girl, was indeed quite a new sentiment. It was a feeling of pity, and I was proud of being able to help her and comfort her. Her eyes never rested upon mine, her hand never met mine. She was very pretty, and I knew she had a tender, loving nature. But nothing interfered with the respect and the regard which I was bound in honour and in good faith to feel towards her. I was proud to observe that she never thought me capable of taking advantage of her. When her father had recovered, he dismissed his servant and engaged another. Barbara begged me to inform her friend of this, and likewise of her hope to gain the new servant to their interests, at least sufficiently to secure the possibility of carrying on some correspondence. I promised to do so, and as a mark of her gratitude she took my hand to carry it to her lips, but, quickly withdrawing it, I tried to kiss her. She turned her face away, blushing deeply. I was much pleased with her modesty. Barbara, having succeeded in winning the new servant over, left me with nothing more to do with the intrigue, and I was very glad of it, for I knew my interference might have brought evil on my own head. Unfortunately, it was already too late. On Christmas Day, Barbara Delacroix's lover entered my room, locked the door, and threw himself on the sofa, exclaiming that I saw him for the last time. "I only come to beg you for some good advice." "What can I advise you about?" "Read this. It'll explain everything." It was a letter from Barbara. It read, "I am pregnant. I have no doubt of your love, my beloved, but I want to tell you that if you can't take care of me and save me, I've decided to leave Rome and to go away to die wherever it may please God. I'd suffer anything, do anything, rather than let my father discover the truth." "If you're a man of honour," I said, "you can't abandon the poor girl. Marry her in spite of your father, in spite of her own, and live together honestly. God will watch over you and help you." My advice seemed to bring calm to his mind, and he left me more composed. At the beginning of January 1744, he called again, looking very cheerful. "I've hired the top floor of the house next to Barbara's. She knows, and tonight I'll get into her room through one of the attic windows, and we'll make our plans. I've decided to take her and the servant to Naples. The servant sleeps in the attic, so we'll have to take her into our confidence." "God speed you, my friend." A week afterwards, towards 11 o'clock at night, he entered my room, accompanied by an abbé. "What do you want so late?" "I wish to introduce you to this handsome abbé." I looked up, and to my consternation I recognized Barbara. "Has anyone seen you enter the house?" I asked. "No? And if we've been seen, what of it? It's only an abbé. We now spend every night together." "I congratulate you," I said. "The servant is our friend. She's agreed to come with us, and all our arrangements are completed." "I wish you every happiness," I said. "Adieu. Now please go away." 3 or 4 days after the visit, as I was walking with the Abbé Gama towards the Villa Medici, he told me deliberately that there would be a military operation during the night in the Piazza di Spagna. "What kind of operation?" "The Bargello, or his lieutenant, will be arresting some person who doesn't expect anything of the sort." "How do you know this?" "His Eminence has to know it.
for the Pope wouldn't venture to encroach upon his jurisdiction without asking his permission. And His Eminence has given it? Yes. One of the Holy Father's auditors came for that purpose this morning. But the Cardinal might have refused. Of course. But such a permission is never denied. And if the person to be arrested happened to be under the protection of the Cardinal, what then? His Eminence would give timely warning to that person. We changed the conversation, but the news had disturbed me. I had a feeling that the operation threatened Barbara and her lover, for her father's house was under the Spanish jurisdiction. I tried to see the young man, but I couldn't succeed in meeting him, and I was afraid lest a visit at his home or at Monsieur Delacroix's dwelling might implicate me. About midnight, as I was ready to go to bed, and just as I was opening my door to take the key from outside, an abbé rushed panting into my room and threw himself on my chair. It was Barbara. I guessed what had taken place, and I could foresee all the evil consequences her visit might have for me. Deeply annoyed and very anxious, I reprimanded her for having taken refuge in my room and begged her to go away. When she heard my order to go away, she threw herself on her knees, and melting into tears, she begged, she entreated my pity. Where is the heart of steel which isn't softened by the tears and prayers of a pretty and unfortunate woman? I gave way, but I told her that it was ruin for both of us. But I'm certain no one saw me when I entered the house and came up to your room. Better if you'd never come. But what has become of your lover? He and the servant have been carried off. He told me that a carriage would wait tonight at the foot of the steps before the church of Trinta del Monte, and that he'd be there himself. In disguise, I walked there with my servant. At the corner of the street, one of the buckles of my shoes came unfastened. I stopped to do it up, and the servant went on. She reached the carriage and got into it. Then, as I drew nearer, I suddenly saw about 30 soldiers. One of them got into the driver's box and drove off at full speed, carrying off the servant, who they must have mistaken for me, and my lover, who was in the coach awaiting me. What could I do? I couldn't go back to my father's house, and I followed my first impulse, which brought me here. And she wept more bitterly than ever. I found myself physically unable to send her away. My poor girl, I said at last. When daylight comes, what do you intend to do? I must leave Rome, she replied. In this disguise, no one can recognize me. I gave up my bed to her, and at daybreak her strength was somewhat restored. That morning I left my room, telling her to keep quiet until my return. I intended to proceed to her father's house and to solicit her pardon, but, having perceived some suspicious-looking men loitering about the palace, I thought it wise to alter my mind, and went to a coffee-house. I soon ascertained that a spy was watching my movements at a distance. Not appearing to notice him, I returned towards the palace and went up to my room to decide what was to be done. I began by making the poor girl eat a couple of biscuits soaked in some canary wine, and I took her afterwards to the top story of the palace, where, leaving her in a not very decent closet, which was not used by anyone, I told her to wait for me. My servant came soon after, and I ordered him to lock the door of my room as soon as he finished cleaning it, and to bring me the key at the Abbé Gama's apartment where I was going. I found Gama in conversation with the auditor sent by the Vicar-General. As soon as the interview was over, Gama came to me and ordered his servant to serve chocolate. When we were alone, he told me that the auditor had come to ask His Eminence to turn out of his palace a person who was supposed to have taken refuge in it about midnight. "We must wait," said the abbé, "until the cardinal appears. But I'm quite certain that if anyone has taken refuge here unknown to him, His Eminence will compel that person to leave the palace." We then spoke of the weather and other trifles, until my servant brought my key. Judging that I had at least an hour to spare, I thought of a plan which could save Barbara from shame and misery. Feeling certain that I was unobserved, I went up to my poor prisoner and made her write the following words in French. "I am an honest girl, Monseigneur, though I am disguised in the dress of an abbé, I entreat your Eminence to allow me to give my name only to you and in person. I hope that, prompted by the great goodness of your soul, your Eminence will save me from dishonour." I told her how to send the note to the Cardinal, assuring her that he'd have her brought to him as soon as he read it. "When you're in his presence," I added, "throw yourself on your knees. Tell him everything, except about spending the night in my room. You must be sure not to mention that, for the Cardinal must remain in complete ignorance of my involvement in this intrigue. Tell him that, seeing your lover carried off, you rushed to his palace and ran upstairs as far as you could, and that after a most painful night, Heaven inspired you with the idea of writing to him to entreat his pity. I feel certain that, one way or another, His Eminence will save you from dishonour." She promised to follow my instructions faithfully, and coming down I went to church, where the Cardinal saw me. I then went out and returned only for dinner, during which the only subject of conversation was the adventure of the night. Gamma and I said nothing, but I understood from the talk going on round the table that the Cardinal had taken my poor Barbara under his protection. That was all I wanted, and thinking that I had nothing more to fear, I congratulated myself on what had, I thought, proved a masterstroke. The next day Gamma came to my room, and informed me that the Cardinal Vicar was aware of the ravisher being my friend, and supposed that I likewise the friend of the girl, as she was the daughter of my French teacher. "Everybody," he added, "is satisfied that you knew the whole affair, and it is natural to suspect that the poor girl spent the night in your room. I admire your prudent reserve during our conversation of yesterday. You kept so well on your guard that I'd have sworn you knew nothing whatever of the affair." "And that's the truth," I answered very seriously. "I know the girl, but I haven't seen her here since I gave up my French lessons. I'm much better acquainted with the young man, but he never confided his project to me. However, people may believe whatever they please." "That, my dear friend," said the abbé, "is one of the vices of the Romans. Happy those who can afford to laugh at it. But this slander may do you harm, even in the mind of our cardinal." And so it proved to be. As there was no performance at the opera that night, I went to the Cardinal's reception. I found no difference towards me either in the Cardinal's manners or in those of any other person. After dinner on the following day, Gamma informed me that the Cardinal had sent the young girl to a convent in which she would be well treated at His Eminence's expense, and that he was certain that she would leave it only to become the wife of the young doctor. "I should be very happy if it should turn out so," I replied, "for they are both most estimable people." The noise made by the affair was beginning to subside when, in the first days of Lent, the Cardinal desired me to come to his private room. When I was seated before him, he said, "The affair of the Delacroix girl is now over, but the verdict of the public is that you and I have profited by the clumsiness of the young man who intended to carry her off. I therefore feel compelled to ask you not only to quit my service, but also to leave Rome. I'll give you an honourable pretext for your departure so as to ensure that you continue to receive the respect you've gained through the marks of esteem I've bestowed on you. Everybody will be informed that you're going on an important mission which I've entrusted to you. You have only to name the country where you want to go. I have friends everywhere, and can recommend you to such purpose that you'll be sure to find employment. My letters of recommendation will be in my own handwriting, and nobody need know where you're going. Meet me tomorrow at the Villa Negroni and let me know where my letters are to be addressed. You must be ready to start within a week. Believe me, I'm sorry to lose you, but the sacrifice is forced upon me by the most absurd prejudice. Go now, and do not let me witness your grief." He spoke the last words because he saw my eyes filling with tears, and he did not give me time to answer. Before leaving his room, I had the strength of mind to compose myself, and I put on such an air of cheerfulness that the Abbé Gamma, who took me to his room to drink some coffee, complimented me upon my happy looks. "I'm sure," he said, "that they're caused by the conversation you have had with His Eminence. You're right, but you don't know the sorrow in my heart which I try not to show." "What sorrow?" "I'm afraid of failing in a difficult mission which the Cardinal has entrusted me with this morning.
I am compelled to conceal how little confidence I feel in myself in order not to lessen the good opinion His Eminence is pleased to entertain of me. If my advice can be of any service to you, do please ask it. But you're quite right to show yourself calm and cheerful. It is a business that can be transacted in Rome? No. It's a journey I shall have to undertake in a week or 10 days. Where will you be going? Towards the west. Oh. Well, if that's all you can tell me, I won't press you. I went out alone and took a walk in the Villa Borghese, where I spent 2 hours wrapped in dark despair. I liked Rome. I was on the high road to fortune, and suddenly I found myself in the abyss, without knowing where to go, and with all my hopes scattered to the winds. I examined my conduct. I judged myself severely, and I could not find myself guilty of any crime save of too much kindness. Where shall I go? This was the question which seemed to me impossible of solution. I thought of it all through the night and through the morning, but I thought in vain. After Rome, I was indifferent where I went to. In the evening, not caring for any supper, I'd gone to my room. The Abbé Gama came to me with a request from the cardinal not to accept any invitation to dinner for the next day, as he wanted to speak to me. I therefore waited upon His Eminence the next day at the Villa Negroni. He was walking with his secretary, whom he dismissed the moment he saw me. As soon as we were alone, I gave him all the particulars of the intrigue of the 2 lovers, and I expressed in the most vivid manner the sorrow I felt at leaving his service. I have no hope of success, I added, for I am certain that fortune will smile upon me only as long as I am near your Eminence. For nearly an hour I told him all the grief with which my heart was bursting, weeping bitterly. Yet I could not move him from his decision. Kindly but firmly he pressed me to tell him to what part of Europe I wanted to go, and despair as much as vexation made me name Constantinople. He moved back a step or 2. Constantinople? I wiped away my tears. Yes, Monsignor, Constantinople. 2 days later, the cardinal gave me a passport for Venice, and a sealed letter addressed to Osman Bonneville, Pasha of Caramania in Constantinople. I arrived in Ancona on the 25th of February, 1744, and put up at the best inn. Pleased with my room, I told my host to prepare for me a good dinner, which I took with a grave-looking individual. To learn who he was, I told him my name, giving myself the title of secretary to the Cardinal Acquaviva. "My name is Sancio Picco," he said. "I'm a Castilian and a staff officer in the army, under the orders of the Generalissimo the Duke of Modena." After a moment he said, "If you feel disposed to hear some good music, come with me to the next room. The prima donna of Ancona lives there." I followed him and saw, sitting before a table, a woman already somewhat advanced in age with 2 young girls and 2 boys. I looked in vain for the prima donna, but Don Sancio Picco presented me to one of the 2 boys, who was remarkably handsome, and might have been 17. I thought he was a castrato who, as is the custom in Rome, performed all the parts of a prima donna. The mother presented me to her other son, likewise very good-looking, but more manly than the castrato, although younger. His name was Petronio, and keeping up with the transformations of the family, he was the first female dancer at the opera. The eldest girl, who was also introduced to me, was named Cecilia, and studied music. She was 12 years old. The youngest, called Marina, was only 11, and like her brother Petronio was a dancer. Both the girls were very pretty. The family came from Bologna, and lived on the talents of its members. Bellino, such was the name of the castrato, yielding to the entreaties of Don Sancio, rose, went to the harpsichord, and sang with the voice of an angel. The Castilian listened with his eyes closed in an ecstasy of enjoyment, but I, far from closing my eyes, gazed into Bellino's. Everything about him indicated a beautiful woman, for his clothes but imperfectly concealed splendid breasts. The consequence was that, in spite of his having been introduced as a man, I fancied that the so-called Bellino was a disguised beauty, and my imagination at once taking flight, I became thoroughly enamored. I went to bed thinking of Bellino. I was sorry to go away without having proved to him that I wasn't taken in by his disguise. Accordingly, I was well pleased to see him enter my room in the morning. He came to offer me the services of his young brother Petronio during my stay in Ancona, instead of my engaging a valet de place. I willingly agreed to the proposal, and sent Petronio to get coffee for all the family. I asked Bellino to sit on my bed, with the intention of making love to him, and of treating him like a girl. But the two young sisters ran into my room and disturbed my plans. Cecilia and Marina were two sweet rosebuds, which, to bloom in all their beauty, required only the inspiration of love. Petronio came with coffee, which he poured out, and I sent some to the mother, who never left her room. Petronio was a true male harlot by taste and by profession. The species isn't scarce in Italy, where the offence is not regarded with the wild and ferocious intolerance of England and Spain. I'd given him 1 sequin to pay for the coffee and told him to keep the change. To show me his gratitude, he gave me a voluptuous kiss with half-open lips, supposing in me a taste which I was very far from entertaining. I disabused him, but he didn't seem the least ashamed. When I was dressed, I thought I ought to pay my compliments to the compliant mother. I went to her room and congratulated her upon her children. She thanked me for the present I'd given to Petronio. "I promise you another gold quadruple, madam," I said, "if you'll confide in me. Confess that Bellino is a pretty woman in disguise." "I can assure you he's a boy, for he has had to be examined before he could sing on the stage here." "And who examined him?" "My Lord Bishop's chaplain, and you may satisfy yourself by inquiring from him." "Well, the only way to clear my doubts," I said, "would be to examine him myself." "You may, if he has no objection, but truly I can't interfere, as I don't know what your intentions are." "They are quite natural." I returned to my room and sent Petronio for a bottle of Cyprus wine. When he brought the wine, I divided the change between Bellino, Cecilia, and Marina, and begged the two young girls to leave me alone with their brother. "Bellino," I said, "I'm certain that you are a girl." "I'm a man, but a castrato. I've been examined." "Allow me to examine you." "I can't. It's clear that you desire me, and such love is condemned by religion." "I will know the truth," I said, and extended my hand boldly. But he repulsed me, got up, and left. So I began my dinner in a very bad humour, but the excellent appetite of my pretty guests brought me round. I soon thought that, after all, cheerfulness was better than sulking, and I resolved to make up for my disappointment with the two charming sisters, who seemed well disposed to enjoy a frolic. Seeing that Bellino was smiling, I kissed him likewise, and his half-open ruffle attracting my hand, I ventured and went in without resistance. The chisel of Praxiteles had never carved finer breasts. "Oh, this is enough," I said. "I can no longer doubt that you're a beautifully formed woman." "All castrati," he replied, "are afflicted with this defect." "No, it's the perfection of all beautiful women. Bellino, believe me, I'm enough of a good judge to distinguish between the deformed breasts of a castrato and that of a beautiful woman. Yours belong to a young beauty of 17 summers." But this he continued to deny. That night I was just locking my door when Cecilia, half undressed, slipped in. Knowing that I was planning to leave in the morning, she said that Bellino had asked if I would take him as far as Rimini, where he had an engagement. I sent her back to say that I'd be happy to do so, provided he promised to satisfy my curiosity about his gender. She left me and soon returned, saying that Bellino had gone to bed, but that if I'd postpone my departure for 1 day only, he promised to satisfy me on the following day. "You tell me the truth, Cecilia, and I'll give you 6 sequins. "I can't earn them," she said, "for I've never seen him naked. But he must be a man.
Otherwise he wouldn't have been allowed to perform here. Well, I'll remain here until the day after tomorrow, provided you keep me company tonight. She locked the door, and throwing herself in my arms, covered me with kisses. She was pretty, charming, but I wasn't in love with her, and I was not able to say to her, as to Lucrezia, "You've made me so happy." But she said it herself, and I pretended to believe her. When I woke up in the morning, I gave her a tender salutation, and presented her with 3 sequins, which must have particularly delighted the mother. Don Sancio had invited us all to supper, and as the time drew near, I went to his magnificently furnished apartments. The table was loaded with silver plate, and his servants were in livery. He was alone, but all his guests arrived soon after me: Cecilia, Marina, and Bellino, who, either from caprice or from taste, was dressed as a woman. My last doubt vanished. During the meal, my greedy eyes couldn't leave that charming being. My vicious nature caused me to feel intense voluptuousness in believing him to be of that sex to which I wanted him to belong. After supper, Bellino sang, with a voice of such beauty that it deprived us all of the small amount of reason left in us by the excellent wine. After many compliments and 1,000 thanks, we took leave of the grand Spaniard, and Bellino and I went to my room, where the mystery was at last to be unravelled. I immediately called upon him to keep his word. You may imagine my surprise when he answered quietly that he had no objection to sleeping in the same bed with me. At this, he proceeded to undress and got into my bed. I wasn't long in following him and in discovering the truth. I'm sure you want to know the outcome, and so you shall. But in the meantime, may I wish you as happy a night as the one which was then awaiting me. End of CD 2. CD 3. There are no words to describe the voluptuousness which Bellino had in store for me. The moment I was in bed, and without either of us uttering one word, our lips met, and I found myself in the ecstasy of enjoyment before I'd had time to seek for it. Bellino was indeed a woman. I couldn't take my gaze from that beautiful face which was all aflame with the ardour of love. After a moment of quiet rapture, a spark lighted a fresh conflagration in our veins, and we drowned in a sea of new delights. The happiness I gave her doubled my own, for it has always been my weakness to gain most of my enjoyment from the happiness I give to the charming being from whom I derive it. The extent of our exertions soon made an interval of repose necessary. Bellino was the first to break our silence. "Are you satisfied now, my beloved?" "But," I asked, "how did you manage to defer your happiness and mine so long? And how did you manage to deceive the world?" "Listen to me," she replied, "and I'll tell you everything. My name is Therese. My father, a poor clerk, had let an apartment in his house to the celebrated Salimberi, a castrato and a delightful musician. He was young and handsome, and he became attached to me. He proposed to teach me music, and finding that I had a fine voice, he cultivated it carefully. His love for me induced him to ask for a reward, and I granted it without feeling any humiliation, for I worshipped him. The mutilation practiced upon his body had deformed him, but he was an angel by virtue of his rare qualities and endowments. Salimberi was at that time educating a boy of the same age as myself, living in Bologna. The boy's father, who was poor and had a large family, seeing himself near death, had thought of having his unfortunate son maimed so that he should become the support of his brothers with his voice. The name of the boy was Bellino. The good woman you've seen here in Ancona was his mother, and everybody believes that she's mine. The story is sad. Both my father and Bellino died within a short time of each other. Since I was left an orphan, and Salimberi knew the grief afflicting Bellino's grieving mother, he was struck with the idea of taking me to Bologna under the name of Bellino, where he could arrange for my board with the mother of the deceased boy. Being very poor, she'd find it to her advantage to keep the secret. "I'll give her," he said, "everything necessary for the completion of your musical education, and in 4 years I'll take you to Dresden, not as a girl, but as a castrato. There we'll live together without giving anyone cause for scandal. All we have to do is to represent you as Bellino, and it's very easy, and nobody knows you in Bologna. But if you love me, you must renounce your sex, lose even the remembrance of it, and leave immediately for Bologna, dressed as a boy, and under the name of Bellino. You must be very careful that no one finds out that you're a girl. You must sleep alone, dress in private, and when your breasts are formed, they'll only be thought a deformity not uncommon amongst castratos.